Hello YouTube. This build video will be the easiest build you can possibly run when it comes to the amount of things you have to do. And the objective behind this build is to cast a couple abilities at the start of the mission and then just press W and hold that mouse button, or press forward on your joystick and hold your right trigger. So I'll explain with some prefacing here, because this is probably an important thing to cover on a build like this. If you wanted to melee only build and you wanted to make this as easy as possible, this is something I feel like a lot of people overlook, is this toggle right here. So this has always been in the game since the beta, when I first started using this as a toggle. This, what effectively lets you do is that when you full draw out a melee weapon, it lets you just use left mouse button for it. And I feel like a lot of people don't know this, so if you are wanting to run this build, I highly recommend running it melee only. It doesn't mean you can't equip primaries and secondaries. Just realize the goal there is to hold whatever it is your switch melee or switch weapons is. This is another key bind that I would probably recommend setting instead of like switch gun. I think this is the default. I'll be honest, I've used it like this since the beta, so what the defaults are, I don't want to find out. But I've been using this setup where you just hold, in this case I hold Q, and then it just pulls up my melee weapon. That was primarily something I used when I was using Daiku as a stat stick for its amalgam mod, just to run my Safun Nikanazaw as my weapon. So with that sort of preface handled, I'll get directly into the build, and I think I'll start discussing the build and then get into Archon Shards and some of the extra layers, but really it's simple and it's flexible. So the idea here is you, at the very start of the mission, you cast Warcry, pull out Exalted Blade, and then you have nothing conditional that you're using to then buff it. So just looking at this build here, there's a clear, the way I have this modded is pretty obvious too. If you're running this on Umbra, then you have these 4 mods that you're switching out. And just to show that real fast, because I'm not going to make separate section for this, example here. So what this build eliminates is Furious Javelin, because we don't want to have to be recasting that. You just want to cast Warcry, pull out Exalted Blade, and press W and hold left mouse button the entire time. So here you're doing the same thing. You're just running triple Umbral to get as much strength as you can, and then Warrior's Rest in order to prevent him from having to decast this if you go into Operator. And a build like this, I would probably just run Unaru, a little bit of extra armor. You have a lot of armor in this build running out with Warcry, triple Umbral, and then the 200 from Unaru. So that would be my recommendation there. I'll show this real fast. This is same thing. You can run sacrificial mods. You can run condition overload and galvanized steel. It really doesn't matter, but you want to at least run these guys and then have a decent amount of electrical damage modded, and obviously galvanized elementalist. And this is an influence build because we're not really worried about this scaling high or having versatility. You're pulling out Exalted Blade, and you're just using Exalted Blade, and with the attenuation changes, it scales really well. The other thing to note is on your heavy weapon, you probably just want to run Dexterity Arcanes. Remember, these do actually stack, so if you have plus 15 on your heavy weapon and then you put Dexterity Arcanes on your primary and secondary, then that works. And then those Dexterity Arcanes actually do get proc by Slash Dash. They get proc by Exalted Blade. There's no reason not to run them if you're primarily just pulling out your melee weapon and doing it that way. Going back to my not prime build, I'll use this to discuss the Archon Shards and other things, but just to recap over this, these are flexible. You can run whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. If you don't have this daily login reward arcane or mod here, then you could just run pretty much anything. It really doesn't matter. You could run Prime Redirection and then a Sentinel, probably to make it even easier. In this case, I don't think the companion matters, but as my general guide for survivability on Excalibur, just apply those. If you're running a Sentinel and you're running Guardian on it, then just run Prime Redirection, but you could still run Prime Vigor for that. It really doesn't matter. I like running Prime Vigor. It's a surprisingly good mod on Excalibur with how neutral his stats are, and then you're getting a lot of armor from Warcry as is, so then you're kind of maximalizing on that plus health, and then the plus shield capacity, it is noticeable. But I've gotten this set up in this way for a reason. The other thing to note here is I'm running Precision Intensify. That doesn't mean you can't run like Umbral Intensify. But just notice here, the benefit that we're getting out of Warcry is the attack speed, and then I'm running Arcane Strike to benefit from that, which if you really wanted to, I think it's one of those extra things where it's like you could do this. If you wanted to run Umbral Intensify because it's the way you're polarized and you wanted to run this variation, then just run Molt Vigor, get that extra 45% strength, and then get Umbral Intensify on here so that you get about 90% strength anyways, and then attack speed scaling, like you can see here, 72% versus this. So like overall, I think this is just a simpler configuration, but if you are running Umbral polarities there and you don't want to run triple Umbral on like Excalibur Umbra, then this would be my recommendation for it. So, but this is base Excalibur Prime, or if you have removed your Umbral polarities from Umbra, this was probably my recommended configuration. You can switch this out for whatever. So getting into the Exalted Blade, same idea. You can run sacrificial mods here, but if you don't run sacrificial mods, probably just throw Gladiator Might instead of one of the 66 or instead of the 60/60 mod. I think this is more valuable. The 40% heavy attack efficiency is more valuable over 60% status chance, choosing between those two. But if you don't have this, it really doesn't matter. The keys here are just making sure you get at least these three, some electric modded onto there, because the heavy attack, you at least want some electric modded on there, because the heavy attacks, the waves from that don't benefit from chromatic blades, so they would only do IPS otherwise to be able to. So you want to have that at least at a minimum. That's the same reason why we're actually running Weeping Wounds on this, even though we're running chromatic, just because this benefits the heavy attack waves. So at least your heavy attack waves in this kind of build with electric modded and with Weeping Wounds should reliably proc melee influence, since it'll get the status chance to almost 100%. Yeah, otherwise condition overload, you could throw that on here. I don't really care for it because in this sort of build, you're not worried about doing that much damage, and you're going to get more benefit out of the initial damage from this, even though we're not going to be slash dashing very often to really make use of prime pressure point over condition overload, because this doesn't apply to slash dash. Just a little quick reminder of that. So this is just a simpler overall higher base rather than conditional increased base damage. So the companion build I won't even cover because it doesn't matter in this. Archon Shards. So because it's influence and we're kind of dedicating base Excalibur to this right now, this was really good. The scale's really good for when you're just using Exalted Blade and when you're running influence. So just at least one of those. It's an extra multiplier that you otherwise don't get. I have the same energy orb. This is probably overkill for a build where you're not really recasting abilities, but this works, so might as well keep it. And then same thing here. This is probably also overkill, but better to have more energy than not enough. And then this is probably just a flatland recommendation for this configuration, even though we don't have to worry about the sentience passive or anything like that. This lets you actually cast Warcry and Exalted Blade and not have energy problems right off the rip, because otherwise you only start with like 110 or so in this sort of configuration. So this, I would say, is a requirement just to be able to make the build sort of function. Your focus school really doesn't matter. I don't think it's worth running Nariman on this. You get enough base combo duration. 20 seconds is pretty long, and it's a self-correcting issue. You're not worried about with Chromatic Blade being unable to proc it, being unable to proc like electric when you have over 100% status chance on electric, because it's only electric, and over base 100%. So really doesn't matter in this configuration. If you want the sort of comfort of Azurin or Naru, which is what I'm running, then you can, but really doesn't matter. Okay, so I'll just show I guess I'll just show one of these missions just to point out, like, instead of running something like a survival mission, which my usual is actually an incursion here. We'll just run a Exterminate here. So as I alluded to, we cast our Warcry, and then we just press W, and kill things with Exalted Blade. So this would be a really controller-friendly build. Completely non-conditional. The only, I guess technically the only conditional things are like galvanized mods and the 2 arcanes, but those are getting procced reliably just from you using the build. So there's nothing you have to snapshot into this. That's where if you were running Arcane Vigor and that variation that I did show, then you would just have to make sure you snapshot into each one of those abilities off the start, which it'll take you a couple of seconds to do that. That's where it's probably not worth it. It's a little bit of extra complexity that doesn't really give you that much benefit. This is all overkill. One of the things I've done a lot with base Excalibur is just... There was a while where I ran it with no prime mods and no arcanes. Or no prime mods, no Archon Shards, and just influence in a similar build configuration, and it was annihilating Steel Path. So it isn't necessary, but a little quality of life improvements here and there help. Might as well use Archon Shards. If you had to just use one Archon Shard for this, because you have a limitation on Archon Shards, then probably just that starting energy, and then like just the yellow ones would probably be fine. I don't think you'd need the 2 violet. As a reminder of little feature thing here where if you're doing this, you could increase your mobility just a little bit by aim gliding when you're using Exalted Blade, but too much complexity for this build, because this build is hold W and hold left mouse button, which is a lot of fun. It's a really easy build when I do play on iOS, because I still do quite frequently still play on iOS. If you happen to see me cross-platform and you play on PC, it's because I'm playing iOS. So I think that was a nice little short demonstration of this build. I'll sort of recap over it. So we're pressing Warcry and Exalted Blade, and then just pressing and holding W and left mouse button. So completely non-conditional. A lot of flexibility here for what you prefer. If you don't want to run these 2, then just don't. But Precision and Densify skills really good here, because Warcry, sure, you get plenty of attack speed from it, and then Exalted Blade is sort of double dipping into this because of its increased base damage, and then also the status chance from Chromatic Blade. So this is just a really flexible option here. And just recapping over this, tons of flexibility here. You just probably at least want this and some electric damage modded. You could even ignore crit if you really wanted to, and it would probably work just fine, but it's got so much flexibility in it. But I think as a base concept, that's a good overview and quick demonstration of it, and entirely viable for even circuit. So thanks for watching.